Yes.
Okay. Thank you for being here. I'm Carrie Douglas. I'm the founder of The Haven. I'm also on our local Ben Lapine School Board, and my husband and I, is my husband here? Also own Cascade Relays, so we're small business owners, and we're starting The Haven to be a beautiful workspace, obviously. We're in an incredible setting. We have 11,000 square feet upstairs overlooking the river, and it's clearly going to be a beautiful space. But really the reason that we're creating it is about community. And you know, my husband and I were born and raised here. We love Bend and Central Oregon. And we think that we're in this really unique kind of experiment as the metro area in the country with the largest percentage of people that work from home of anywhere in the country. And we're worried a little bit about what that additional layer of isolation, when you add it to social media and technology, and you know, fewer people going to church and all of these trends of being less and less connected to community. And so our kind of ulterior motive is to create a beautiful space that people will then gather in to create community. And one of the things that we believe at our core is that people, individuals, will be better and businesses will be better if each individual human person is able to be their best self. Woo! So, you know, if you can come to work and be your whole authentic best self, you're obviously going to be happier, your company is going to be better. And so that was one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation and many more conversations that we hope to have at The Haven. And so I want everybody to just think for a minute and kind of picture yourself when you have been in what some people like to call flow, or when you are just in the zone at work and so effective and happy. Right, I'm sure we're all there, maybe not as often as we want. And then I want you to think for a minute about a time when that has not been your reality. Maybe you had a death in the family, or you're stressed out about childcare or finances, or something is going on in your personal life that makes you less effective and less happy at work, right? So what we're learning more and more about is that people who identify as LGBTQ or people of color or other underrepresented groups deal with that sort of distraction and internal trauma all day, every day, right? When your reality is that at any moment, someone could question who you are as a being, your core, that leaves you much less able to be your whole and best and most effective person at work. And so, you know, I grew up, my early professional years, we talked a lot about diversity, right? And all that means is what your workforce looks like, or who is part of it. So if your workforce is more diversified, that's just about who makes it up. It says nothing about whether your workplace is actually inclusive or welcoming to that diverse set of people, right? And so many companies had diversity initiatives, but never thought about whether or not those people that they recruited then felt truly inclusive and welcoming. So we want to take that conversation to the next level. This is obviously happening all over the place. We're not the first, but we wanted to try to contribute to the conversation. You're going to hear a lot more from our moderator in a minute about that. And let's see. I think the other thing is we just wanted to kind of note that we're trying to model a few things tonight that you may notice. So one is the use of the pronouns on your name tags. Are you going to talk more about that, or do you want me to? So the idea is that for people who may not identify as the pronoun that you might expect them to, that can be uncomfortable to have to ask or put yourself out there as having different pronouns. And so if we all model using our pronouns on name tags in our email signatures, then it makes people who might have pronouns that we aren't as used to more comfortable sharing their pronouns because everyone's doing it, So that's one thing we're modeling. You'll see that we changed the signs on our bathrooms here to be gender neutral. The space that we're designing upstairs, we designed the bathrooms from the ground up to be gender neutral. We are paying our panelists. This is something that I've talked with a fair number of folks about that we think is really important, that when we're asking folks to kind of educate the white, cisgender, hetero, usually male sort of norm, that whenever we're asking people who are in the minority to go through what is sometimes an emotionally can bring up some more trauma and sort of talk about what's hard for them, that we shouldn't expect them to do that for free. So we've chosen to pay our panelists, and we think that that's a good model. Thank you. This is a safe space tonight. Jamie will talk more about that. The other thing is, we've been talking about when we host conversations like this, and again, when we're asking panelists to share things that are sometimes sensitive or difficult for them, at the networking afterwards, what we don't want you to do is go up to a panelist and like tell them what a great ally you are, or tell them what you think about what they shared, or tell them that they're wrong, or anything like that. After an event like this, you know, the right thing to do with a panelist is just like if they were talking about, you know, medical devices. Ask them questions, thank them for being on the panel. Don't sort of treat them as an experiment, or feel like you have to share your opinion on the topic that they just shared. And I only share that because we've been hearing about some experiences recently in Bend that some panelists have had after putting themselves out there and then having kind of bad experiences after the event. So I think that's it. I am going to introduce Rebecca, who is the VP of HR at St. Charles, right here, and is on the Ben Chamber board. We're really grateful to have two co-hosts tonight, OUTCentralOregon, which Jamie represents, and he's going to talk a little more about that, and then the Ben Chamber. So Rebecca's on the board of the Ben Chamber. We also have Talina here, and she's just going to share a little bit. And then we'll turn it over to Jamie and get the panel started.
Thank you, Carrie. And this is an absolutely beautiful spot. So thank you for hosting, and thank you all for being here tonight. As the Ben Chamber, we're really excited to be a co-sponsor of this event. We feel that it's really important that as we recognize the employers that we work with, that we promote inclusion in the environment. In fact, at the Ben Chamber, Katie Brooks just met with us, I want to say at our last board meeting, because we didn't have at the Chamber an inclusive policy and on inclusion, or talking about it, and she brought a copy and proposed this new policy to us, and we all had the opportunity as board members to give input, and it was really great to be able to see the Chamber taking those initiatives and really trying to work with the employers in our community to make it a better work environment. I appreciate all the panelists, and I'm sorry to have my back to you tonight, but I'm excited that we can hear from them and get good ideas of how we can take it back to our environments to really make it a better place. So thank you, and I'm not sure who I'm turning it back to, and Carrie left me, so.
Jamie.
Okay, here you go, Jamie.
Thank you very much. I'll stand up just for the beginning, and then I'll sit down with the panelists. But my name is Jamie Nesbitt. I am president of OUTCentralOregon. OUTCentralOregon is a nonprofit that's based here in Bend. It's almost OUTCentralOregon 2.0. The organization by the name was around for about 8 years, primarily just a meetup group for people within the LGBTQ community. My partner and I moved here about 3.5 years ago and recognized that there were some needs in the community that weren't being met, or that we didn't feel were being met. And through all of that, we decided that we really liked the name OUTCentralOregon. We couldn't think of a better name. So the group said, go ahead and take it. So we formed an incorporation, a nonprofit, just a little bit over a year ago. And our mission really is all about inclusivity, and I think more importantly, visibility of the LGBTQ community. I think Carrie did a great job about distinguishing diversity and inclusivity, and I think we're going to talk a lot about that concept tonight. But I also think it's important for visibility. And not just visibility as LGBTQ being visible as a lone group, it's visibility within the community as a whole, with our allies, with our partners. And so OUTCentralOregon does this by partnering with businesses, other organizations, and even government entities to promote this. A couple of our highlights, and Carrie, let me please point that out for a second. We were instrumental with our work with the Deschutes County Health Services to get a HIV outreach and testing van for the first time in Central Oregon. It services all 3 counties in Central Oregon. That van has been around for just a little bit over a year. We had a big coming out party for it basically a year ago where we screened, we were here about the AIDS crisis in the early 1980s in San Francisco. But now that van is available for testing at essentially all of OUTCentral Oregon's events, and it's expanding beyond that. And I'm just going to make a plug. It is Pride Month. Happy Pride, everybody. Woo! National HIV Testing Day is actually June 27th. Everybody has a status. Everybody should know their status. Everybody needs to get tested once in their life, more so if you're at risk. And there's free testing with Deschutes County Health. You can just go to their website, and they have a calendar of it. We're really, really proud of that. But we also do a lot of fun stuff, mostly outdoor activities. We put on the second, for 2 years now, the second annual Winter Pride Fest in collaboration with Bachelor and a number of other organizations. 2 years ago was our first year. We had a budget of $200. We had about 150 people that showed up. We were expecting 20. Last year, for the 2019 event, we were awarded a Visit Bend Cultural Tourism Fund grant, a Catalyst grant, of $10,000, and in November we had 450 people show up. So the event is growing, Bachelor is on board, and it's really, really exciting. A couple of quick things that are happening this week, because it is Pride Week here in Bend. We are doing, in partnership with The Haven and Cascade Relay, we are doing the first ever Bend Pride 5K fun run and walk, and it's going to be this Saturday in conjunction with Central Oregon Pride, which is in Drake Park. It's going to just be a fun run. It's going to run down the Deschutes River. Great medals. You can see one there. Great raffle prizes. The community, local businesses have contributed, I don't know, $3,000 to $4,000 of raffle prizes. It's just amazing. And yeah, absolutely. Central Oregon Pride Festival, which has been going on, this is going to be its 15th year, is put on by a different organization called Human Dignity Coalition. And the president of that is Jamie Bowman, right here. She definitely needs some applause, I would say. Pride is a big event, and we hope you all see you there. It's going to be great. They've done a really great job this year. I think there's a lot of stuff that's happening, so check it out, basically. Okay, so we're really pleased to be here, and we have this amazing panel, and I'm going to sit down now, and I'm going to do a really brief introduction, and then they'll tell themselves a little bit more about themselves. To my immediate left is Aaron Rook. He is Diversity Coordinator at OSU Cascades. Then we have Eric North, VP of Human Resources of First Interstate Bank's West Division. Jamie Serra, who is an employee with the U.S. Forest Service. Rob Landis, who is Online Reputation Manager and New Car Delivery Specialist at Subaru of Bend. And last but certainly not least, Liliana Cabrera, who is an educator, a facilitator, and a trainer, and is on OCO's board. So, welcome. So, I thought we'd quickly start with each panelist just saying a really quick little bit about themselves, maybe something funny, just to kind of lighten the air a little bit, and then we'll start with the program.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here tonight on this beautiful, beautiful day. Again, my name's Aaron. I use he, him pronouns, and I, in addition to working at OSU Cascades as the diversity coordinator, I work with Better Together, co-facilitating with Liliana, their LGBTQ school success work group. And additionally to that, I guess I do some equity work around with the organization Allyship in Action, and we have done a number of trainings on LGBTQ competencies, trans awareness for healthcare providers and others. So I nerd out about this stuff. I really enjoy it. My fun fact, I suppose, which I shared earlier with someone, I forget who now, is that I used to play jazz trombone.
Hi, my name is Eric North, and I'm the VP of HR for First Interstate Bank.
Eric, can you just hold it really close?
Really close? Okay. All right, got it. So Eric North, VP of HR for First Interstate Bank. New to Bend. I've been here relatively new, about a year and a half. Relocated from Atlanta, Georgia. Was there for 22 years. Grew up in Boston. I'm actually a recovering CPA before I went into human resources. I like the people side of the business much better than the number side of the business. But I've been in Bend for a year and a half. I have a husband. I'm married. We've been together 24 years. We have 2 children. A 16-year-old son who goes to Mountain View. And then my daughter's 13 and she's over at Cascade Metal. So enjoying everything about Bend, everything outdoors, and really glad to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Serra, and let me see, I'm 48 years old and I've been working for the Forest Service for about 25 years, and I've been in Bend for about 4 years and worked in various places throughout the West Coast, and really happy to be here.
My name is Rob Landis. I prefer he, him pronouns. If you call me anything else, it's a little awkward. I work at Subaru Bend, like Jamie was saying, and I guess a fun fact about me is I was a homecoming princess in high school in Prineville, where I was born and raised. I still live in Prineville, and surprisingly enough, I do not get any flack. I'm welcomed by all who know me and who knew me before. Very supportive of friends and family, and I think it's pretty great that our communities are opening up more of these discussions, and I'm happy to help however I can.
Hi everybody, my name is Liliana. My pronouns are she and her. I have lived in Central Oregon. I live in Redmond for the last 3.5 years. I get around. I really like. That's my fun fact, I guess. With a lot of different organizations, just kind of seeing that I moved from a very diverse community to a less diverse community. I felt that I needed to be involved and try to make some changes and get out of my shell a little bit. I came for my job, my professional job, which is at Planned Parenthood. I'm the Community Education and Outreach Coordinator, but I'm trying to decolonize the way I introduce myself and let you all know a little bit more about who I am as a person, not just what I do for a living. But even though that's really who I am, I'm really passionate about sexual health, reproductive rights, and protecting myself, my family. I guess that's all I'm going to say for now. You'll get to know more about me as we talk.
Awesome, that's great. So just a couple of quick format aspects for tonight's discussion. So this, as Carrie said earlier, is a safe space. We'll talk a little bit about what that means from the panelist perspective, but I think everybody kind of gets it. Be respectful is probably the best way to think about it. Each panelist is going to be asked some questions. A question, they've seen them before. They have the opportunity to answer the question. If they decide to pass, they're free to do that, no worries. Should a panelist want to add something after they've already answered the question, hearing other panelists speak, they can do that as well. Just indicate to me that you'd like to do that, and we'll get the mic to you. But we don't want this just to be one-sided, as most panel sessions benefit from interaction with the audience. You guys probably have questions that we haven't thought of, and that's really where the learning happens, in our opinion. So you've been handed some index cards, I believe. So throughout the night, you can write down a question or two, and we'll look at them a little bit later. But if you feel you really want to ask something during the panel discussion, raise your hand, and we'll make that happen. Okay, let's start. So I thought Carrie mentioned a few interesting things at the beginning, kind of based on some statistics, or what statistics realize, essentially. But I'm going to give you a few real statistics in the sense of what LGBTQ employees have to manage in their life. 47% of LGBTQ workers say they are not out at work. 38% of them because they feel that they'll be stereotyped. 36% think that they'll be made to feel uncomfortable at work. And 31% that feel that they'll lose their relationship, their working relationship with their colleagues. This goes in line with what Carrie was saying. People are not coming to work as their full self. And if they're not coming to work as their full self, they're not being productive and creative and innovative. 53% of LGBT coworkers have reported hearing jokes against gays, lesbians, transgender. And the top 10 reasons why LGBTQ workers don't report negative comments to their managers or HR is they think that nothing's going to be done. And that's what's got to change. In 28 states, you can be fired for being lesbian, bisexual, or gay. This is 2019. And in 30 states, you can be fired for being transgender. So you can be fired for just being who you are. So pretty powerful statistics. I thought we'd start with some stories in the workplace to kind of give everybody a sense of what we've all experienced in our workplace. And then we can build from that in terms of what best practices they're going to be, what employees do, what employers do. But I think it's really good to get some personal perspective on what we've all experienced. As Carrie said, oftentimes we always, in the LGBTQ community, feel that we always have to come out. We always have to come out when we get a new job to our new coworkers, to our new friends, to our new neighbors. There's something that I think if you're cisgendered and married and straight, you don't think about that. But that's something that we have to think about all the time. And so sometimes people will hide their identity at work. And again, they're not bringing their true self. But I think I'd like to ask the panel to share a work situation that either was handled really well or wasn't handled well at all. And I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to be very vulnerable here. I'll start it off. Many years ago, excuse me, allergies. Many years ago, when I was sort of young in my career, I had to file a sexual harassment with HR at my company. And it was against my manager, who was 12 years younger than me and a straight woman. And we went through all of the research and the looking into it from the company's perspective. And I finally met with the CEO, and it was still a small company. I was actually employee 20 when it started, so I'd been there for a long time. And the CEO told me, Jamie, come on. Basically, you're gay. And not Liliana, I'm sorry, Liliana. Her name is Leanne, that's I apologize for that. She's straight, like there was nothing meant by that. And that was devastating, because here I was, building my career, learning a lot from this VP, my manager who was also VP at the company, and yet the company wrote it off as, basically the sexual harassment aspect was just thrown under the rug. It didn't make any sense. I had to live with that, and I stayed there for many years because it was the right place for my career. But to this day, I question whether staying there was really the right thing to do, or taking it to a higher level of a suit, basically.
Thanks. I might share just a couple real quick ones. I'll first say that I've been really lucky to work in workplaces that are generally really kind of progressive and supportive, and all of that. I've worked in alternative media for progressive nonprofits and higher education, right? These are places we expect to be good at this stuff. But some of the types of experiences I've had are, for example, when an employer has learned that I am transgender, suddenly they start using different pronouns for me. And that was a really awkward situation because it would happen with the boss, the owner, in front of other people from the community I'd never met. And it was unpredictable, right? Most of the time he would call me he because he had no reason to call me anything else. He didn't know me before. But we would be in meetings randomly, and all of a sudden he would start calling me she. And I'm just like, do I just ignore and pretend it didn't happen? Like, okay, whatever. And then, having in other places where, and And again, it's kind of this weird dynamic sometimes where we don't talk about things coming from women necessarily in terms of microaggressions or whatever, but I've worked in places where it was majority women workplaces where they had really strong views about what it means for a person to have testosterone in their body, right? And making these like weird, wild assumptions, kind of like, similar to, are you really upset or are you just on your period? That kind of a thing, oh, testosterone, it's making even the dog is wild and aggressive because of the testosterone, and this kind of the weird thing, and that, and then just up to the way where I think LGBTQ people are often put in a position to advocate for the rights of all LGBTQ people in their workplaces, and to have to advocate for that when it's something that affects you personally. So more recently I was trying to push for greater access to an all-gender restroom, a single-stall restroom that was difficult to get to. And when I brought it up in an operations meeting, the pushback I got was, well, but then I'm going to have to wait longer to take a shower. Like, more people are going to use the restroom, and I might have to wait longer to take a shower after I go exercise at lunch. Or they would say, well, can't people just go to a different building? And so I ended up having to share, more personal things than I wanted to, so just to be able to make that point. So I think that kind of putting people on the spot, I feel like it's really common.
So I guess when I was starting my career, I worked for, at the time it was what they called the Big Five accounting consulting firm for Arthur Andersen, giant global firm, very conservative. And being gay, I always had decided that I wanted to be out at work. I didn't want it to be an issue. It definitely took a little bit of time to build up the courage to get to that point. But as I progressed in my career, I felt that I was people were pretty accepting on the surface, but then there would be occasionally you'd run into sort of, I guess, comments of that water cooler talk and basic things like that. But then one thing that really stood out to me is so my husband and I, we've always talked about early on that we were going to have kids, and at the time it was during kind of a conservative era in the administration. And so we were looking at all different options. We were looking at biological options. Do we want to do like surrogacy? Do we want to do international adoption? Do we want to do local adoption? And so we had decided on having a gestational surrogate, not a mistake donor. One of us is the biological father of our kids. And I was in recruiting at the time, so doing a lot of recruiting from college campuses and even experienced hires. And I was talking to a particular partner, and somehow or another, we had a partner at the firm who she was gay, but she was not really out. She still would bring like men to functions at work that sort of a beard, I guess is what you'd call it. But I would see her in the community and be able to talk to her openly, but yet she would still have this sort of facade going on at work. But while she was kind of putting on this facade, all the partners really knew, and so, but they would talk about it sort of behind her back, but not like why aren't people just talking directly to her? I mean, if you know, and why are we kind of going along with this? And I guess she sort of felt that she had to kind of put this front up. She was the first female partner in the Atlanta office at Arthur Andersen back in the 80s. I mean, so you can only imagine kind of the bullshit that she had to put up with coming up in her career. But so, since I was in recruiting and we were talking about some particular students, and the partner said to me, he's like, we need to hire more lesbians. We need to hire a lot more lesbians because they don't have children and they're focused on their career. And I was like, okay, I'm a gay man and we're going to have kids somehow. It's not going to be easy, but we're going to do it. But I was just really kind of surprised by, like, there is this assumption out there that, well, if you're gay, you're not going to have kids and you'll make a great worker and you'll be able to put in all this time and, and effort into your career and, not have the trappings of a family. And so it was just, I don't know, just a very different mindset and, a little bit off-putting, but again, it was sort of a sweeping generalization that I think some people do have in the workplace. And that was just one that was kind of different that stood out to me at the time. It was just, it's not, I think, I guess you'd call it homophobic, but it still was. It didn't rise to the scale of, I think, some of the other instances that maybe you hear about. But it's still enough that it really kind of struck me as like, why would you say something like that? It was really kind of just ignorant.
Can you repeat that question? Yeah, just a workplace story that either was that? Yeah, it can be positive or negative. Yeah.
Well, excuse me. I came out at work as trans, I lived most of my life presenting as a male, and I had everything. I kind of figured it out like in about 2011, and there was times in my childhood where, you know, I knew I was born in the wrong body, but, you know, growing up and being born in 1970 and growing up in the 80s, I mean, it just wasn't a thing, and you had to get in one line or another, and so I had to, and then as time went on, you know, the culture changed a little bit, and it kind of kept reoccurring in my head over and over again, and it got worse and worse, and I got to a crossroads where I had to come out and be who I wanted to be, and that's meanwhile, and all that time, got married, had a family and everything, so there was a lot at stake, and I had a really good experience at work, and it was good to have that support system at work, and having people educate our workforce. The people are different, and having not to worry about that I'm going to get fired. So I had a really, that was a good thing, but that was only made it a little less difficult, but it was still difficult.
My story is not necessarily a bad experience, but with today's day and age, with technology and all that it brings, when I have started some new jobs, I've had coworkers that find out my name, and then they Google me, and then because of all that I've been active in as being transgender, also having a YouTube channel, it just kind of comes up when somebody searches my name. So I found out through a coworker who let me know about a guys group that decided to have a chat about their Google search of me, and he was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that there was a group of employees that were Googling you and learning all about you, and so I think that, you know, everybody knows at this point. And I've never tried to hide it, so I was there, I was still so new, I wasn't even able to out myself yet, but I have been out to HR when I applied. I've never tried to hide it, and so when that person was coming to me, he was like, just so you know, like, I was standing there and I overheard it, and it really didn't sound like it was coming from like a mean place. I don't feel like they were, you know, talking behind your back necessarily, like they weren't talking bad about you. It was more of kind of a fascination, like, oh my god, I would have never known he's trans, so I guess, does that mean that he was a girl or what's going on? It was more of they need education, and so ever since I found that out, I have been very open to every employee where I work. I'm very supported there by the owner, HR. I was told that if anybody does say anything to me, that they want to know immediately, because they will not tolerate that. And so I felt like they had my back, which made me pretty confident to just be myself and relax and do whatever I needed to do. And since then, I've had numerous employees, coworkers, come up to me and ask me questions if there's something politically that's going on that might affect trans individuals. And I can tell that he's coming from a place of wanting to understand from the source rather than hear it from media sources that are sometimes spouting off some things that are inaccurate. So I really appreciate that and respect that my coworkers can come to me as a source.
So mentioning who my employer is and just kind of knowing what kind of organization they are, I've had mostly positive experiences in the workplace, but because I'm an educator and I go out into different places in the community, that's really where I experience a lot of the microaggressions and misunderstandings about people's identities. And so some of the things that I just experience, which a lot of the times people might not notice that they're doing, is when they greet people, like a group of people, ladies and gents, and it's kind of like, well, what about the non-binary folks in the room as well? And so those are the things that I'm working on speaking up a little bit more. Also acknowledging that I'm the only person who is identifying as a person of color up here. Recognizing the racial anxiety that goes into me trying to inform or provide information to a white person who would be in a position of power in these different spaces. So these are some of the things that I experience. And even within the organization, even though we just recently started doing equity and inclusion, we just hired somebody in the last couple of years at the affiliate that I'm working at now. And the affiliate that I was previously working at in California, it was just a diverse community. And so people of color of all different backgrounds were already involved in a lot of the decision making and a lot of how to create a welcoming space for our clients. But that training, I think they made a lot of assumptions of the people that they were hiring. So one of the situations that happened was when I was doing education, we were doing satellite services at a youth center, and there was a trans girl who wanted to get birth control. And she told me what her name was, and she told me, what was going on for her, why she was wanting to access birth control. And I wasn't very informed. This was back in 2008. But our affiliate in Santa Cruz was starting to provide hormones for gender-affirming care. And I knew that was starting, but I didn't know how to get her connected. She was a minor. But when she saw the provider, even though I gave her the chart and I gave her her correct name, she misgendered her. And so I realized at that moment, okay, we need to do greater training for everybody and not just make assumptions that somebody's working for this organization, that they're going to be able to do the right thing all the time. So that's my story.
Great, thank you, panelists. A couple of concepts came up that I think are worth mentioning and thinking about: unconscious bias and microaggressions. I couldn't come up with my own good definition for either of these. I think they're very complicated terms and understanding, so forgive me for reading a little bit, but I think this kind of helps put things into perspective, at least it did for me. So as far as unconscious bias, and we've probably all heard of this, right? But let's think about it as a group right now. It's where we instinctively categorize or stereotype people and things, basically based on observed criteria, such as age, weight, skin color, gender, education level, social status, job title, sexuality. Sometimes we're not even aware that we're doing it. We just automatically assign these traits to individuals based on these characteristics. For example, you could be seen in, this could come up in performance reviews by managers, where, again, it's unconscious, but they may, for someone who is older, get a less favorable review than someone who's younger, yet doing the same job and, at equal level. And honestly, we're all guilty of it. We just can't avoid it. It's almost inherent in our human being experience. But it's important that we become aware of it and mindful of it. And then microaggressions. And these are like everyday slights, indignities, put-downs, and insults that minorities or any other marginalized individuals experience in their day-to-day life, in their day-to-day interactions with others. And some of them came up just as we were going down there. Aaron's perspective of, oh, you're acting that way because you must be on your period. These are kind of a little rough, sorry, but they make the point. Or to somebody who English is not their first language. Oh, you speak excellent English. What she's trying to say is, and the term for that from a couple decades ago was mansplaining, if you all remember that. Or is that your natural hair? I mean, these are not just microaggressions against the LGBT community. We do it against everybody. But I think when you're from a marginalized community, you get it much more. So what I would like to ask the panel, and I know some of you have already brought some of them up, but I'd really be interested in understanding or hearing your thoughts on when you do experience unconscious bias, when you do experience microaggressions, how do you deal with it? How does it make you feel? And how do you deal with it in the workplace?
I think one of the ways I've experienced unconscious bias in the workplace is this assumption that because I'm an LGBTQ person and I've worked at LGBTQ organizations and the media and things like that, that's all I care about, that's all I know how to do, that's all I'm going to focus on. I started writing for a publication, and they were like, you can't just write about gay things. Yeah, I figured, I mean, we don't have a gay paper here, so I'm a staff writer, I cover city council. I'm not very gay. So, those kind of things, like there's this idea that, well, clearly you care about this thing because it's an agenda, that it can't just be this is the right thing to do. And that can be really challenging because, like for me at least, I think I really struggle with advocating for things that affect me personally as opposed to advocating for things that affect others. It's a lot harder to push for something that especially if there aren't a lot of people who share your identity, right? Because then you get this fear that they're going to see it as like, well, you just care about this because it's you. Is there anyone else that impacts, And so there's that kind of thing that, and I think impacts just on the unconscious bias in general, I think shapes how we just engage with the world. I don't know of very many, at least LGBT people who are truly their true selves, in the workplace, in the community, and sure, we all have to put on work drag to some extent, right? Not everyone loves khakis and polos, I'm sure, but maybe wear suits on the weekends. I don't know. But I think for LGBTQ people and for people from marginalized communities in general, there's this sense of having to conform and to not, make waves and not, silly things even like, coloring your hair is becoming more common now. When I was in high school, my parents would not let me do it. For anything. But, I recently decided to start dyeing it again, as you might have noticed. And I had a lot of anxiety about that. I was like, God, are people going to, I already, and I should complain about looking younger than I am, but people don't always take me seriously, right? They think, oh, are you a student? I've stopped using a backpack. But I worry about that, right? Not only on will they take you less seriously, but I think there's this sense of, for LGBTQ folks, having like a pressure to conform to I don't want to say boringness, right? But the way you dress at work, you almost have to overcompensate sometimes, right? To not oh, you're just being real queer, But the microaggressions thing, I think, the other thing I'll add about that, I guess, because I already spoke to some of the ones I've experienced, is that even if the microaggression's not directed at the person you're talking to, it can still impact them. So, for example, on campus, folks are still really struggling to get used to they/them pronouns. There's only a handful of students that use them. And so I often find that staff, they have good intentions, right? I know it's not malicious, but they really don't get the pronouns right, and sometimes they don't even stumble, right? It's just wrong, And I brought it up a couple times, and for some people it's just still not changing, right? And that's not about me personally. People rarely get my pronouns.
Place where people, they do feel that they can come to us and talk through some of these issues, which I really appreciate. I think with some of the trainings that we do now and that you see in the workplace in general, with unconscious bias, that's really kind of the new wave of sort of harassment training and some of the other things that you probably remember from over the last maybe couple decades. But what I find with what I've experienced in the workplace, I think, is more because when people know that you're gay, and I don't mean to be kind of glib or funny about this, but it's just like, oh, well, I'm decorating my house. So why don't you come over and give me your opinion? And it's I'm the most design challenged person on the planet. And no, but there are just things that people sort of assimilate with being gay, and they just assume that, oh, well, since you're gay, you must know how to do hair, and you're great at arranging flowers, and you can design a house, and things like that. So I think that that's it sounds kind of silly, but I just find it more annoying than anything else. It's it's not that I'm trying to be somebody different, but it's just that no, it's not everybody kind of falls into a category, like that. Or there are stereotypes that exist, but it doesn't mean that they're true for everyone. And so I just think it's just some of it can be it's nonsense, sometimes. But on the other side of it, I also think that when we were rolling out unconscious bias training in my former employer and just some of the things that we're going to be doing at First Interstate Bank, I get some people well, oh, HR is coming in the room we're the politically correct police, and I think that I don't want to have the reputation of we're not the police. We're here to encourage people to be their best, bring their whole selves to work and just do a great job. And we're a for-profit organization. Let's be successful, and let's kind of focus on what our mission is. Being great stewards of the community and all these other things. And it's these when we put people through these trainings, we get kind of the groans about we're just being politically correct, and it's no, we're just it's not about being politically correct. It's about not being a jackass, sometimes. And I think that, and just being a better human, a decent human being, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to put the human in human resources and give people a really good experience, and know that they're safe at work, and they can come to us for things if they need us, and because these things do happen out there, and we want to educate people on that so that we can really take it out of the workplace.
As far as unconscious bias, see, I've been in my current workplace for about 4 years, and I was in the closet for about a year, and so I already developed a rapport with people before I came out, and so and a good rapport with a lot of people, and so I think maybe that it was harder for people to have that. What I did experience, though, is it's definitely better now, but as far as the pronouns go, I felt like I was misgendered just by people making a mistake because they knew me as one person, and then I said I'm going to be this other person now, and that does hurt, like you said. It's kind of like if you're having a really good day, something like that will almost ruin your day if you don't just rise above it. And it's along the lines of what Aaron said, is that you feel that people aren't taking you seriously. But I think a lot of it is just brain chemistry, where they've imprinted you already as one kind of person, and so change is hard. But I've had a really good experience aside from that, and I used to really, really let it bother me. Now I try to let it roll off of me if people misgender me.
So I've had some experiences similar to what Eric was speaking about with the interior design and all that stuff, but it's more along the lines of, oh, you're trans, do you know so-and-so who is also trans? I'm like, where do they work? I'm not recognizing the name, and I'm terrible with names anyway, but I'm not going to know every trans person that there is, even if they do live in Central Oregon. I met somebody new just 2 weeks ago that lives in my hometown who identifies as transgender, and I'm like, where did you come from? I've lived here all my life. How have I not heard? But for people to assume something like that, and I've heard lesbians being asked the same thing too. Do you know so and so because she's lesbian too, and I think you guys would get along really well. It's like, it doesn't work that way. So other than that, when I've been approached by people that have those unconscious biases, I generally try to approach it as an opportunity to educate. And I know that around Central Oregon, there's probably a lot of education that is lacking, especially in older generations, where a lot of these LGBTQ topics are just so taboo that it was just never spoken about. It's queer, it's wrong, it's different, so we're just not going to talk about it. And so I feel like I allow myself to be in the position where I let people know everything about me. I'm an open book. I will answer any question that they have, and I will let them know that their preconceived notions or what they have learned growing up in whatever kind of background that they came from, that it's not the way that they were taught, and that there's a different way that maybe they can open their mind to and think about other possibilities, and not just something that's set in stone that Grandpa told me when I was 5. So that's what I try to do, is just make it a learning opportunity.
So when I think about microaggressions and like being confronted with those, sometimes it's really hard to recover. Sometimes those microaggressions like really derail what I was about to say, and it's usually something super brilliant, and then I'm like, I don't know what I was going to say, and now I look really not knowing what I'm talking about right now. So they can have a really big impact in that way, and that's, I think one of the less kind of intense experiences that people can have. And then thinking about unconscious bias again, so thinking about like where I do my work, and a lot of the times people say, oh, well, you're a women's health clinic, and not acknowledging all the other people that come and see us for different types of services, or when they're having conversations about prenatal programs or programs for new mothers, and not really considering that not everybody who gives birth is going to be identifying as a mother. And so those are different things where it's, again, I try to be a voice in those spaces that I can, but also acknowledging some of the limitations that those unconscious biases that people have, that, well, if I do bring it up, that, oh, it's because she's queer, or, oh, it's because she's brown, or, oh, I'm not going to mention this in front of her because then she's going to get really upset about it. And it's like, well, if I'm just making a comment and trying to offer you a better way or a different way of doing these things, it's not that I'm trying to shut you down or tell you you're horrible. I'm trying to give you the gift of being a better provider to whoever it is that you're seeing in your clinics. And so people want to come and see you, and that, you know, a lot of the times when I was starting to do my work here, I really needed to get to know the folks in the community before really learning more about who the providers were, because I wanted to know what their experiences were and who and where were people being seen and who they were being seen by. And so being able to be a part of that has been my way of trying to respond to those different things, for better, for worse, effective or ineffective. Making some noise is better than not at all.
I'll try to be quick, but I just thought of a couple other things in terms of ones that had maybe more impact and might not have been obvious to other people that they were causing a microaggression. So one had to do with, I used to work in development, and my supervisor had gotten some feedback from a major donor, like a real major donor, the kind you want to keep those people, right? And they were concerned because our Facebook page had a lot of rainbows on it. It was post-Pride. We had been at Pride. Our Pride booth had lots of rainbows on it. I was standing there wearing some kind of queer rainbowy shirt, right? You know, it was the time of year you're going to have rainbows on the Facebook page. But they were, you know, they didn't feel like they could share that with their friends because they were conservative or religious or whatever. And this, you know, caught the folks in that meeting by surprise. But unfortunately, they didn't respond by saying, let's talk about why it's really important that we serve this community. Instead, I think they were flustered and didn't really know what to say, and so they came back to the office and started talking to me about how we needed to do a better job of representing other perspectives. Maybe we could throw some more religious imagery in there. Maybe we could, you know, and it's like it wasn't coming from ill intent, right? You know, the people were like, oh God, we want to make everyone feel comfortable and safe and included, but we can't lose these people's money, and we want their friends and whatever, right? And I think we have to think about where it's going to require a sacrifice from us, right? It's one thing to be like, oh, I'm going to be nice and friendly, and I'm going to go to gay pride, and we'll have a blast, it'll be fun. I'm an ally. But if it actually means you have to lose something, that's different, right? And so for me, that was really a hard experience, because what I took away from that was, you're too gay, you need to tone it down. You know, and it's something that I was already self-conscious about, right? Because I was out in the community talking to people about the organization, trying to persuade them that they should give us monies to continue our services. And I was already aware of the fact that, like, I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea, right? You know, not all of it, you know, it was an organization that was really served a broad population, that, you know, our donors came from a wide variety of backgrounds. And so just recognizing that the way you respond to things that happen maybe more externally and how you communicate those to staff, that's going to have a really big impact. The other piece that came up as we were talking about how to potentially expand services to a broader range of genders than we currently were serving. And there was a lot of pushback from staff at the time. And while I understood it was a bit of a culture change to talk about that, one thing that I found really challenging was that, and I'm not trying to throw any organizations under the bus here, they probably know how I feel about it, but you know, we had this conversation of, you know, I am of the community that this organization would serve. You know, I've had the experience that they're trying to address, but because of my gender, I would not be eligible for many of their services currently. I don't currently need them, but I had to ask the question, you know, at what point in my life experience did I no longer become a safe person to serve? You know, and realizing that the messages you're sending about who you're willing to serve and how that's going to also come back to your employees, right? Like, if you would not be willing to serve your own employees in an inclusive way, then it's not going to create a welcoming workplace, I think.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. That was great add-on. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any questions? All right. I want to bring it now into the reality of the workspace itself. And we briefly touched on the idea of a safe space. I'm going to give my perspective on a safe space, and then I'd like the panel to speak to that as well, and with examples where it wasn't safe, or if it doesn't feel safe, how you addressed it, or can you address it, or what makes it uncomfortable. For me, a safe space occurs both sides, from the marginalized individual and also from the non-marginalized individual. Both sides need to feel safe to ask questions and to be themselves. I think that if an employee can't come to me and ask me about my life as a gay man, how can I expect them to accept me as well, if that makes any sense? I think both sides need, I don't want to say sides, but I don't know any better way to say it, but you get my point. I think both sides have to be there has to be some vulnerability that has to take place. Both we do daily, and we feel vulnerable perhaps to some degree based on our LGBTQ status or being marginalized. But I think other employees need to be vulnerable as well. You may need to feel a little uncomfortable asking Aaron something that you want to educate yourself, and Aaron needs to respond to that. Not to pick on you, Aaron, but Aaron needs to respond to that in a welcoming and safe way as well. Again, oftentimes I think safe space is given from the perspective of the LGBT community, meaning we need to have our safe space, but I think our community needs to give a safe space to our non-community, if that makes any sense. Because ultimately, we're all in a workplace together. We should all be allies of each other, regardless of what or how we're different from each other. LGBT being a sexual difference or LGBTQ difference. Anyway, I'm going to lose my point there. But so I'd like you guys to comment on that, my perspective, and some feedback on what makes a good safe space for you, some practical tips maybe within the workplace, and what isn't a safe space, if you have any thoughts on that.
I just want to check in with Liliana. Do we want to switch the order or anything? I feel like I just talked. Is that cool? Or do you not want to go next? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Usually I'd have a little bit more time to think about my response. But what makes it welcoming? Let me think. People being interested in my life and making it okay for me to be able to post pictures of my family. I think not making an assumption right away of like, oh, what does your husband do? And just kind of taking the cues of like different language that people can use about maybe partners until we share how we address our married partner or whoever we partner with. I think also having visual cues. I know I walk into buildings that have like the rainbow triangle, and I mean those are some things, but I think it takes a lot of work behind that as well, because it's not just about like having your building be something that's visibly welcoming, but also the people there, so that way they're also expressing that welcomingness and also informing themselves of what's going to be the best way to be able to communicate with somebody that I might not know a whole lot about their identity. I think also having gender-neutral bathrooms everywhere all the time, and not the one that's in the office that somebody has to ask to go and use, and not forcing people to out themselves. I think being in relationship with people and just treat us, everybody, with dignity and respect, and see our identities, but don't ask us inappropriate questions about it.
I don't know if I really have much to contribute to this, but I feel, for me personally, it's important for me that I know I have an employer where there's an open door policy, and it's not just something they say. It's totally always open for me to go in there, address my concern if there is any, and then we discuss it and see kind of like a course of action, what we can do about the situation, whether it needs to be really investigated or if it's maybe something that we could talk through and resolve without anything getting too serious. I do think that, like Liliana was talking about, the visual cue, if there was a sticker outside of a business, I totally agree with that point that you can't just slap a sticker on it and call it good. Like, the company needs to be behind that, and it's not just for HR or the employees. Coming from Subaru Bend, like, I'm constantly thinking about our customers. So even with the restrooms, like, we want our customers to feel included as well. And there's an access issue right now where we're currently making plans to rebuild some stuff, and there's a few things that I brought up that I've seen because it's an older building, it's very old, but accessibility for any of our customers in a wheelchair. If they are coming into the service department, if they need to use a restroom, they have to go outside and around and go up a ramp. And so that's something that needs to be addressed, and just little things like that. I feel comfortable with the company that I work for, that I can bring that to their attention, and it's not going to be met with any aggressive pushback or anything like that. Like, it's always like they're very grateful that somebody brought something to their attention that maybe they weren't even thinking about. So.
A safe place for me is when your workplace has Paul's education. Actually, they've educated the workforce. So if someone else that comes and they're different, it's just like they're just like a normal person, and they won't think anything of it and make a big deal of you. Also, that management will support you.
So I try to make a point to, since being in human resources, I want to make sure people can see who I am. I'm out talking to people, interacting with people. I'm not behind a screen. I do encourage people to come visit me in my office, and I actually kind of make HR is the toy department basically in any company. So my office we have candy, and I have Play-Doh, and I have like all kinds of things on my desk that when people come in, where they might come in really anxious or really angry about something that happened, but when they come in, they kind of see a little playground in front of them too, and they sort of take a step back, and they can start being a little more introspective. And but also letting them know that you can come in here, we can close the door. These conversations are completely confidential unless it elevates to something illegal or something like that. But I also think that I want them to feel comfortable in the space that I create for them, so that they can open up and they can really just open up and talk about anything or whatever it is that they wanted to come in and talk about and get to a resolution point. But I want to do it in a way where we can kind of diffuse the anger, just lighten the mood a little bit, where people will be a little more vulnerable and I think authentic, and really be productive in the conversation that we're going to have.
I might start by being slightly contrarian, but then I'll get with the program. So I don't necessarily believe in safe spaces. I don't think they're possible. Just like safe sex isn't possible, right? We don't use that anymore, right? Safe sex, maybe safer spaces. Certainly it's a good aspiration to have spaces in which everyone can be their full selves. I think some things that I've seen work in different workplaces is really, and I think ties on what a lot of you have been saying, is those proactive efforts. It's not just that you have a workplace where bad things aren't happening. Like, that's great. That should be the bare minimum, right? But it's different to actually feel included and welcomed. And one thing I think about is checking in with your employees to actually ask, especially if you know that they're part of a marginalized community, like, how are things going for you? Like, and really kind of that open door policy, but to an extreme, because I think a lot of times people think, well, I'm a friendly person. It's posted on the website. They know where to go. Like, have you ever, if any of you have ever tried to file a complaint at work, most people, and in my role at OSU Cascades, part of my job is to create that sense of welcome and inclusion and all of that. And yeah, we have reporting procedures, but if you don't know what counts as bias, if you don't know what your rights are, if you don't know what's going to happen if you report something, you're not going to report it, right? So similarly with what we hear about sexual assault and the lack of reporting there, you have to not just have the systems in place, you have to create a culture where people know that you want them to report, right? Because I think sometimes, particularly with folks from marginalized communities, there's a sense of like, I'm just going to keep my head down, I don't want to cause any problems, And so I found even when interacting with folks in my workplace who've had some really negative workplace experiences, and we're finally, they're finally coming up after many years. They still are like, it's fine, it's not a big deal. I just don't want it to happen to anyone else, right? And so we have to be proactively asking people. I don't know that I can recall ever having been asked by an employer how I'm doing. Even though I'm usually the only person who has my identity in any workplace. I'm often in a role to try and make things better for other people in my workplace, right? But no one stops to think, are you doing okay? How are people treating you? And so thinking about that, but certainly, like people have said, the visual cues are big. Making sure that you mention LGBTQ people on your website, right? A lot of it has to be more overt than what people think. And then really being diligent about not letting all your bias show when you think nobody's looking, because that will really, if you can talk a good talk, but if people know you're not walking the walk, then it's almost worse, right, to kind of oversell and underdeliver. So I think being really explicit about your support, really having that open door where you create that culture, right? Like I worked for a brief period of time at Consumer Cellular, the call center in Redmond. Not something nothing against call centers, right? But I didn't walk in there thinking, wow, Redmond call centers, they're going to have a really solid, HR, everyone's going to feel respected. But they were actually super proactive and very explicit about, it was essentially like a pro-narc culture. They're like, this is what is not acceptable. We watched all those videos from the 90s, the sexual harassment, the bias, the whatever. I don't know if they've ever made them again, but they were very clear. If you see something happening that is against our culture, you tell us. We expect you to tell us right away, and I found like that really resonated. Even in a training, we were in small groups working, and a colleague or a new coworker had said, like, that's so gay about something. I was like, yeah, maybe could you use a different word? And he's like, and later he came back up to me and he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that. But that's how my friends talk, that's not me. So I really appreciate you bringing it up. I was shocked. No one has ever, you don't think you give feedback and people actually take it, but when you create a culture where that's expected, I think that can start to happen.
No, that's great, Aaron. I think that's really important. I think culture is really critical. And I have some questions about culture and how that is established at a company. I think Eric might be the first person to answer this question. And there's a series of questions that are all going to be related about workplace policies and practices. I'm assuming the majority of larger companies' workplaces have very well established and well thought through policies on this to make sure that the workspace is a welcoming space for everyone, right? Not just the LGBTQ community. But I'd like to understand practically what that means, and does policy in terms of how it turns into reality, is it better from a top down, where culture comes from the top down, or more grassroots from the bottom up, or is there some balance, and is it based on company size? Just some things to think about. I'd like to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, culture is the big word that everybody likes to use, but no one can really clearly define. I think because when you go into an organization, there's definitely a feeling that you get. I think from being around certain employees and just do they share similar values? Like, are they involved in the community? Do they put their people first? And they're hard charging. They're all about excellence, and what they do. It really comes down to, I think, just really, to me, it's like how you feel in the organization. Are you comfortable there? Do you feel you can be authentic, in the space that you're in? And culture definitely varies among companies. I've worked for very large organizations, over 100,000 people, where there's definitely there's a lot of policies around, say, inclusion and just respect in the workplace and things like that. And then what surprised me, because I've worked for big organizations where like Deloitte being one of them, which they're known worldwide for their support of LGBTQ and I think everything across the board. When you think about just diversity and inclusion perspective. And then I came to work for a smaller bank, a regional bank here in Bend, Oregon, of all places, and I was a little hesitant to kind of see what that was going to be, what that was going to look like. But I did just making the decision that I'm not going to change who I am, and still going to be the same, and I'll be out at work, and I was really pleasantly surprised, because here I went to a meeting in Billings, where our headquarters is, Billings, Montana, a very small conservative town, and our bank was actually founded by a family, so this very wealthy cattle ranching family in Sheridan, Wyoming, of all places. billionaire cattle rancher back in the 60s decided that, wow, this is an underserved community. Nobody's loaning money to cattle ranchers and farmers and ag business, and so I'm going to buy a bank and I'm going to grow this bank, and I'm going to focus on our communities, because if we have strong communities, we have strong business. And they went from 1 state to 2 states to 3, and then the acquisition of Bank of the Cascades here in Bend, which got them into Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. But what was interesting is that the culture was always sort of this kind of mountain culture. So you had Montana and Wyoming and South Dakota, and they just bought a bank that actually has presence in Seattle and Portland and Boise and Bend and Eugene, and so very different markets that they had traditionally been in. But when those cultures came together, what we found is that it was not only embracing these other cultures from the banks that they've acquired, but also just that the assimilation I thought was really quite miraculous. I think there was a lot of very similar feelings to community and that type of thing, but it was not. Nobody ever put like labels on anything. It was very open to just about everything. And I went to Billings, and we was at a meeting where we had the chairman of our board, who's the son of the founder. He's 82 years old, silver hair, looks like a 1970s televangelist. And I was thinking he's probably this most conservative person, and I was really very sort of nervous talking to him. But then, kind of he was asking just different questions about, how do you like Bend? And I know that you're new there, and just, he knew enough about me. But then he had asked me, he's like, so is your wife and your children enjoying Bend? And I said, well, actually, I have a husband. And he just kind of looked and didn't miss a beat. And so I continued talking. I kept waiting for a reaction, like a negative reaction. But I was pleasantly surprised that he was, and as I was talking through just our experience here in Bend, and he said, he said, I really want to talk to you a little bit about sort of the future of the bank when we think about diversity and inclusion, because he said, I feel like we're sort of lacking in that area. And he's like, I really would like to sit down and talk with you about just some things that we could be doing better. We're a growing bank, and we want to be an employer of choice, and I understand that these are things that, while we've always been a very accepting culture, we've never really thought about, should we be doing more? And as we've been moving into these different markets and thinking about what our culture is going to be and how we're going to shape that, for this person who is, I had my own sort of unconscious bias, I guess, about an 82-year-old silver-haired televangelist looking person out of Billings, Montana. And so I feel that, I was just really pleasantly surprised. I feel like we can't judge a book by its cover. But what really mattered to this family and the business was the culture and the community, and I think they just never felt they had to maybe sort of profess it from the mountaintops, like Deloitte and some of these other big companies do. I think some go out of their way to maybe over advertise it, and where this was sort of kind of organic and natural, and this is just who they always were, and never really thought about that. So it was a pleasant surprise for me when you think about just how a culture can start and where it came from, but what it grows into, and it's different everywhere. I mean, it's hard to put your finger on it, and I think we're still probably going to be doing research into it, in future years. But I think that it's a very important and it's a critical thing. But I think as a person, you need to really examine not just, and I think how does it feel at work, but also what is the value system? How does that tie into what they're doing? And is it making it better for the employees and for the community and everything around them? So, kind of a long, rambling response, but I thought that I'd throw that out there. Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, I'd just say the U.S. Forest Service is over 100 years as an agency, and the culture is definitely top-down run, and it's been a good thing. Because I've been to several different offices and just recently lived in Lakeview for 4 months over the wintertime on a promotion, and because of that culture, I had some apprehension about going to a more conservative town from where I live in Bend, and everybody there was really kind, just like my office in Prineville. So I think that is a really good thing for us.
So in some of the board work that I've been doing, so thinking about like the grassroots, the top down, the who gets involved in policy making kind of, I'm sorry, I'm distracted by my water bottle. I don't want it to float away. So thinking about who's involved in that policy making, right now we have meetings for an organization that I'm on the board of to collectively come up with our organizational policies. So coming from a smaller organization that's just building, where you get to create your culture. Initially, I didn't really know a whole lot of bylaws, and I wish I knew more back then when we were just getting started, because I would have looked at more things that already were creating inequities. So really looking at those things and involving people who will be impacted by your policies. So a lot of times policies get put together in boardrooms or by an executive director, and it's not always inclusive of the people that are going to be affected, employees, people who are going to be receiving your services, all of those different things. And then it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a while because not everybody's going to agree on the language, and particularly when you don't have people who are comfortable or familiar with leading with an inclusivity lens, you're going to have people that are like, I'm nervous about this because all of the policies for all of these larger organizations don't look anything like this. I've been trying to research really good policy, and it's hard to find. It's not always listed on people's websites, and sometimes I like to go and look and can I borrow from that? And it's really hard, and it's hard to build those connections for larger organizations to say, hey, can I look at your bylaws or your policies? And sometimes like the main ones that the federal government says you have to have, there's templates, but those are already kind of set up that are to be inequitable. When we were looking at our bylaws, they kept referring to board members as him or her, and I was like, can we just change that to there? It just makes it inclusive automatically, non-gendering the pronouns, right? And so all of those different things, just thinking about how you build your policy will then impact how your culture is developed in your organization. So I gave a talk a while back. It's pretty ambitious to try to fit into an hour and a half on a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you can't do that in an hour and a half. That's an ongoing conversation that you have to have, and that willingness to really include people that you don't always agree with or have understanding or are willing to open up and say, you know what, we are going to try this because this hasn't historically been tried, because we've been following the pattern that has led to where we are now. But if you want to make that change, you really have to reflect on those and be open to including and really thinking about the language in the policy, talking about inclusive language, but also thinking about plain language so that it is understandable. It's not full of legalese and jargon, where sometimes people will actually use that as a tool. So thinking about what Erin was saying about the NARC culture of like, this is what we don't want you to do, thinking about policies in a way of like clarification and creating space for what you want your culture to actually look like.
While we're passing the mic down, I just want to thank everybody and allow for one more question, and down the line a discussion, and then we'll have a closing and networking inside at the end. That sounds great?
I guess briefly touch on the change top to bottom, bottom to top, etc. I think in most of my experience, it seems like the change comes from the bottom, but it requires responsiveness and receptivity from people who have power, whether that's at the very top or at the middle level. Eventually, you're going to hit a ceiling where you don't have the power to create the change that you're trying to create. But I think even if in organizations that try to create it from the top down, and I don't think it's a bad thing, right, to set out with an intention of creating an inclusive culture, that's good, right? But you still have to be responsive to when it's not working, right? Because you can't just decide, oh, this sounds like a great idea, it's going to be perfect, let's just do it. And then it doesn't work, right? So for example, I was working with a prospective student, a potential applicant the other day, and it was just through her experience of trying to apply that we realized, oh, wow, there are all these barriers for folks in various marginalized situations that we weren't aware of. This particular applicant was currently homeless, and for whatever reason, I really don't know why, the application asked for an emergency contact. Apparently you need that when you're applying to college, I don't know. She doesn't have one, right? And so we had to figure out, okay, so can the shelter you're staying at provide that contact for you? She couldn't get her transcripts because she thought she might still owe money because she had left an abusive relation. It's like all these things that we don't realize until someone gets into that situation and is like, oh wait, they can't move forward. And so I think, to me, it's really about responsiveness and recognizing that everyone in the organization is going to have a valuable perspective. It's not just the HR director or the program manager or whomever, that you should really be listening to the people in your organization, the people in the community that you serve, and be shaping and having responsive policies like that. Because I don't think there's just a perfect set of policies out there that if everyone adopts them, everything's going to be just fine, right?
No, great points on that question, everyone. I learned some stuff, actually. One last thing, and it kind of goes building on the whole workplace policies concept. A lot of employers provide mandatory sensitivity trainings for lots of different areas, of course. I'd love to know your thoughts on them as far as, do you think they're effective? Do you think they provide more aggression within the workplace? Do you think they actually are educational for people?
So many opinions about this. It's a debate that comes up a lot in my workplace and my other various roles, right? Because in an ideal world, everyone would know all the things and know how to treat everyone well and have all those awarenesses. But yeah, it gets weird if you have people in a space that don't want to be there and they're not into the material. And it takes a different kind of facilitation for that kind of a space, right? Because you have to be able to respond in a way that doesn't derail the whole experience for everyone else. And so it's challenging. I don't know if I have a pat answer. I think that sometimes our efforts to create mandatory experiences, it seems like more and more they're online modules. How many of you have learned something meaningful from an online module? It's like some of them. Sometimes they're like, if they're really specific, like about serving particular communities, right? And it's like a webinar kind of thing, sure. But in my experience, it's not the way to teach people about these things, right? They're not just intellectual things that, someone gives you that information and now you know, and it's great. But I do think that, especially in fields of work where you're working with vulnerable populations, like in schools, healthcare, things like that, if you're a police officer, there's some things you just need to know. And I hate the term sensitivity training. I'm not taking that. That's just a term that's out there, right? Because we don't just need to be sensitive to each other, right? We need to act in ways that are inclusive and equitable and not promoting bias. But so where I'm landing lately is this idea of, we need to give everyone like some basic information about both expectations, like how do we expect them to treat one another, and basic information that allows them to understand people who are different from them, have a little context, right, for where they're coming from. But beyond that, then I think my ideal is kind of that positive peer pressure approach, where you just make it a part of the culture that everyone participates in these kind of educational experiences, and hopefully you are working with facilitators who can deal with folks that are going to be pushing back a little bit, because it's going to happen, and the way you respond to that's going to affect everybody else in the room. So I think really just kind of a combination of getting some of the basics covered, but then creating a lot of opportunities that are really encouraged to attend.
Definitely agree. I think the approach that I find works the best is obviously the in-person facilitated training. I feel like for something like this, where it involves people and feelings and human interaction and emotion, I feel that it has to be facilitated by an individual. The unconscious bias, I think, is kind of the latest wave of this kind of training, because it does get into people's minds, their hearts, and their sort of responses to things. And I think it really has a greater impact from that perspective. That's not something you can get online or just doing like a learning module, like you said. And I think that, and so we're bringing a lot of that delivery into the workplace, but with facilitators who can really, when you have a group of people from across different spectrums, and being able for each one of them to talk openly or individually about what they may have experienced, or just something just down to like who was raised by a single parent, or who still has their grandparents living, or just simple basic questions that really bring people. It gets to the core of kind of who they are and what's important to them. And I feel like that's where the real change happens. And so I feel like it has to be, from a policy perspective, it should be something that's in person. It should be facilitated by, I think, the right professional. I think there's other assessment tools out there where people like to have. I think people like to have everyone just figured out. Like, who am I working with? Like, what are they like, and who are they, and just having them figured out. And I feel this is a way in which to do that, but it also helps people grow in a way where it's like, wow, it opens their eyes to a lot of things and to different experiences that they may have not grown up with in the bubble that they may have grown up in. And so I think that's the way to go.
Well, it's been my experience that most of it has been online diversity training the last few years, and some people, I think, are just going to be annoyed by it. but people that are actually in the closet at work are just going through a lot, and I think for the good of the order, those people have to get over it.
I agree that there's a point where you know, people who are marginalized have been uncomfortable for so long that I think it's time that maybe some other people that aren't marginalized feel a little bit of discomfort. I don't really have a whole lot to add on after all of that has already been said, but I do think that it's important to keep in mind that there are people whose learning brains work differently than others. So some are visual, some are auditory, some are the mix in between. So for some people it might help them to do the online courses to learn about this information, and for others they might need to have more of an interactive experience. So I think maybe having an option for one or the other might be beneficial, just to kind of open it up to different kinds of learning minds.
Same. I think that a combination for folks who really are uncomfortable with some of the information, but also giving them the opportunity to talk it through with somebody who can help to facilitate and process the information for them. Because not everybody's going to be great in a group and not going to feel comfortable to ask questions, and will ask the questions in the worst ways possible. And those spaces for people to be able to be vulnerable and feel that vulnerability to experience that some of the things that we do that they aren't aware of. But a combination, I think, is really nice. So that way people who take a little bit more time to process, who is me, can kind of sit with information and then think about the questions that I want to ask and be more intentional with those questions that I have. And some people aren't going to be intentional at all. But so a skilled facilitator to be able to, or facilitate as a team, for some folks to kind of take a break and say, you know, this is a lot of energy right now, and I can't with this question or whatever it is. But those real life experiences, I mean, we're in our development as human beings, we know that we kind of grow from our emotional brain first, and we revert to that when we are presented with information that we're uncomfortable with. And so if we can practice more of that, and those online modules don't give you that practice. I mean, you take a quiz at the end, and if you mess up, you can take it again and keep taking it until you get enough answers right. But you don't really get your questions answered. And to have somebody who can support you in that development and growth. So even if you have those online modules, if you can have that support person, or what we've been doing in some of our spaces is having affinity groups where we can go in and kind of say, you know what, I've experienced in this training, and you all, you know, share my identity, and I want to be able to process through some of this with y'all, and not always put the burden on, you know, a queer person or a person of color to answer the questions all the time.
Excellent. What a nice night out is tonight. My name is Tracy Keene. Gosh. I am one of the board members here at the Haven, and I'm also a board member at OUTCentralOregon. So I was really pleased to have this happen tonight, and thank you all for coming. This was a really important discussion, and I wanted to thank all of our panelists. We appreciate your time. You are all LGBTQ leaders in our community, and we want to make sure everybody is respected. We also thank our hosts, our co-hosts, Ben Chamber, OUTCentralOregon, and the Haven. I wanted to also say I go by pronouns she and her. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I hope that your takeaway tonight is to bring information back to your workplace and create an active role for process improvement. So whether you create surveys at your workplace to get a pulse, you provide diversity on your websites. I think that's a great thing to get started. You can participate or support philanthropy opportunities.
but I think it's important that we all make change in our culture for the professional careers and our daily lives, but year-round, not just June. Okay. I encourage you to update your policies and provide ally personal trainings, as we were just discussing. I think that that's a more human approach, and to empower those who are going to be enforcing these behavior expectations. I'd also like to mention for you to seriously consider reading the book, The Glass Closet. That is a good one about diversity. One of the handouts that we had tonight was a Haven pledge. It is a two-sided form. So that's a great example if you'd like to take that back to your business and consider doing something like that at your own company. Most importantly, let's reframe how Central Oregon is operating. So being inclusive does not mean just meeting statistics. Failure to take positive action for LGBTQ plus community can harm a company's workforce, its reputation, and growth. I think we all agree on that. So lastly, some great corporate examples that I'd like to mention are Apple, who marches in the San Francisco Pride Parade. Burger King, believe it or not, Burger King, yay, has launched a Pride Burger. Locally here, 10 Barrel has released their LGBTQ IPA beer, as well as St. Charles is very active in their new inclusive care education. So takeaway from my side is to make a commitment to be aware, to be visible, to be active, to be innovative, and to be advocates. I'd now like to introduce Chelsea. Chelsea, yes, come on up. She's our executive director.
Thank you, and I hope I'm really grateful to be a member of the Haven and help lead a really inclusive, welcoming workplace for a lot of Central Oregonians, and we'd love to see you back here again, but don't leave yet without having your questions answered, because that's one of the things we really promised from tonight. And in conversing with people in advance of this evening, I really wanted us to each have a safe place to ask those questions that we may be wondering. I'm reading right now the book Becoming Nicole, and I'm blown away, and it kind of breaks my heart, the pain that people go through when they are marginalized. It's kind of phenomenal. I lived in San Francisco for a long time. I was active in the arts community there, and I don't know, it affected me, but it didn't affect me the way that it does now. It should affect all of us, that people in our community aren't embraced. So thank you for your vulnerability. Means the world to me personally to have you on our panel and have you share from a very personal place what it's like to be you in this world. And let's hope that together we can create a world that's more welcoming, more embracing, more accepting, and help our future generations also take greater action in that direction as well. So thank you.
Thank you all. So let's go ahead and head inside since it's getting a little chilly. There's opportunity to network. There's plenty of resource materials. Check out the information that we have circulated. Thank you.